Welcome back to my reading of Auralia's Colors. It is a very busy day outside. You may be hearing cars and trucks passing my house. I would encourage you to use your imaginations and incorporate those sounds into the troubles that are going to fall upon House Abascar in this chapter. Captain Ark Robin is our main character, and he's not really using his imagination here much. He's not a very imaginative fellow, and frankly, this chapter is full of his memories. So he's remembering trouble in the city. And so maybe these rumblings, if you hear them, can become part of the soundscape of those troubles. Anyway, this is chapter 4 of Auralia's Colors. Snagged by a riptide of memory, Captain Ark Robin recalled how that momentous night so many years ago changed everything in Abascar. It had begun with someone rattling the door while he lay watching his wife, Seyressa. Hours like these, when this weary healer could turn away from the sick and the suffering and find a spell of peace, were rare. He would have ignored the visitor just to let Seyressa sleep. But this was not just a visitor. This, the wall shaking, the latch breaking loose from the doorframe, would have to be a royal summoner. Reluctantly, he met the summoner's haughty gaze and learned that his presence was required in the king's tower. He joined Tarbrona at the end of the avenue outside Ark Robin's living quarters. In those days, Tarbrona was captain of the guard, silver-haired and small, but tough as gristle, unwavering in his obedience to Calmarcus, and strangely prescient when it came to the king's endeavors. Thus, it unsettled Ark Robin to learn that Tarbrona knew nothing about the reason for their summons. They proceeded together, quietly, with haste. Arriving at precisely the moment, the house watchman sang out the haunting midnight verse. An additional lyric, a storm warning, only increased his feeling of dread. Inside the palace, at the entrance to the king's fireside library, a doubled guard let them in and then closed the doors firmly behind them. It was not Calmarcus they found there. A shift of moonlight fell through the tall window at one end of the narrow chamber. A hiss of wind crept in and slithered along the floorboards. No one stood at the map table, and no one was pacing and pondering scrolls from the voluminous library. There was only little Calraven, in his white nightshirt, sitting on the floor before a wall of shelves, talking quietly to himself. Beneath him, uncurling, was a great map of the expanse. Calraven's small hands moved stone figures across parchment, as though playing a game of strategy. He glanced up once at the defender and captain, blinked. "One of the pieces is missing. Do you know where it is?" The men shared a troubled glance, then shook their heads and shrugged. "My apologies, young prince," said Tarbrona. This seemed to earn them his disregard, for he solemnly sighed and said, with his father's familiar melancholy, "I suppose it's my mystery to solve." Captain Tarbrona cleared his throat. "The prince is never awake so late. And where are the attendants assigned to him while his mother is away?" Abascar's gates had opened for Queen Geralaine's departure 8 days earlier, while the courtyards resounded with the pomp and parade she arranged to celebrate her every decision. Geralaine had surprised even the king with her announcement. She wished to see another house, Bel Amica, for herself. This was not out of character. From the time Calmarcus first discovered Geralaine wandering in the wilderness, her mind had been fixed upon all she did not possess. As the daughter of merchants, she had been poor, powerless. As queen, with no one in Abascar to refuse her a request, she worried herself with Abiscar's reputation elsewhere in the expanse, concerned that her people and power might not compare to another's. Aggravated by reports that House Belamica had become a place of wonder and invention, Geraldine locked herself in her chambers until her husband consented to this journey. Belamica's decadence was famous, and it was no secret that the Belamicans had accomplished much by sea. Ark Robin had heard witnesses describe ships returning from Belamican settlements established on faraway islands. When the king surrendered to Geralaine's demands, she sent messengers to Belamica announcing her visit. Then she ran off with Abiscar ambassadors, bearing gifts of precious stones, determined to measure Belamica's wealth and ambition, and to flaunt the best of Abiscar. King Calmarcus had remained behind, a sleepless, nervous man. Ark Robin had come to the palace expecting to find the king wearing out the library rugs, busying his mind with visions of Abiscar's storied past. Summonses that came this late in the night were usually harbingers of trouble. The only trouble here was the young prince's search for a missing toy. In the fireplace light, the king's high-backed chair cast a tremendous shadow across the room. An open bottle of Hajka rested on the floor. Ark Robin winced. Hajka was a threat to the king's health against which no soldier could defend. He knew Tarbrona would come to the same conclusion, that a foul temper had seized the weary king. The queen, Ark Robin thought. Has something befallen Geraldine in Belamica? And then came the second surprise of the evening. It was not King Calmarcus who rose from the chair, but Queen Geraldine. She gave the men an exquisite fright. There they stood, burdened with layers of skins, leather, and metal, duty's costume, not the armor of war, while Geraldine wore a silken nightgown. Barefoot, she approached them as she always did, gingerly, the way someone wary of snakes tiptoes through tall grass. Cascades of golden curls, wild as willow strands, fell about her shoulders. This was not formal attire, nor was it fitting for her to appear thus before any man but her husband. Ark Robin feared he would not be able to tear his gaze from Geraldine, that he would not be able to hide his enchantment or control his thoughts. Were the king to suddenly appear, conversation would be awkward indeed. Tarbrona knelt in flustered obeisance, expressing astonishment to find her here, already returned from Belamica, and wondering aloud why there had been no announcement or reception. Geraldine reassured them warmly. Word had reached her by messenger hawk that Calmarcus was sick, and she should return home. The king had retired to bed, assisted by a nurse. Her words were rehearsed, tainted with that somewhat sour accent of forest folk, and she moved so swiftly from one subject to the next, they did not think to wonder who might have sent out a messenger hawk to recall her without their knowledge or consent. But he thought of it now, in retrospect. And viewing her from this distance, he could see her far more clearly. Rumors of Geraldine's origins ranged between outrageous and impossible. In the king's version of the tale, he had found her while traveling. As a young prince, he preferred riding horseback fast over open ground to taking vauns through dense, dark woods. Vauns were for laborers and soldiers. Horses were for adventurers and men of fortune. On one solitary venture, he had followed his curiosity northward. His discovery enchanted him, and for hours he had concealed himself to watch her washing a basket of apples in the river Thronescall until she slipped into the water to bathe, singing songs that broke his heart. When he approached her, she told him she was the daughter of ware-sellers, unsworn to any house. She had been wandering for days, struggling to stay alive, moving slowly southward toward Abascar. Her thoughts were unfocused, meandering between the truth, which was bloody and awful, and a delusion in which she was certain her family had merely gone on a journey and forgotten about her. Surely they would return, she told Calmarcus, but she would welcome someone to watch over her while she waited there in the wilderness. She welcomed his close attention to her account, his haste in helping her find food, and his knowledge of healing herbs. He won her trust. When night arrived, and her family had not returned, Calmarcus brought Geraldine to stay among the orphans who had been assigned to the gatherer's care. No one came to claim her, but she seemed so delighted by the prince's frequent visits that she never fell into grieving. He visited her often, foolishly assuming he could do so unobserved. One day, Calmarcus had taken her riding on his father's finest horse to revisit the site of their first conversation. When she saw the place again, she leaned into his embrace and wept. The memories she had shut away broke down the door, and so he learned the truth. She had been gathering fruit high in some apple trees and had later returned to find the wagon stolen, the bodies of her family scattered in pieces beside the river. Alone at the desolate scene, she had tried to drown herself but failed, awakening on the Throne Skull's shores, far south of the bloody ground. Her father, mother, brother, even the older sisters who had tormented her in childhood, and all the meager resources they had stashed in their skin-covered wagon, all of it was gone. Filled with adolescent zeal, Calmarcus vowed to drag the killers in to be tortured to death in Abascar's dungeons, vows that brought a hungry fire to Geraldine's eyes. In those years, beastmen had not yet darkened lands north of Abascar. The blood of these merchants had been spilled by human hands. The ware-sellers' greatest concerns in the north, beyond the threat of disease or the trouble of weather, had been wild animals, river worms, and one other danger. Calmarcus aimed his revenge toward the raiders from the clans of woodland thieves. He would mount a campaign, with the blessing of his father, to comb the woods north of Abascar and eliminate those marauding clans. Then he would ask Geraldine to marry him. When she became his promised, she would be ensured a new life of honor and respect she would want for nothing. He sealed this promise with a ring, one sculpted by his good friend, Shar Ben Frey, an aging mage with unmatched stone-crafting talents. The ring would make it clear to all that she was to be treated with favor. 2 years later, despite the displeasure of King Harbrona, Calmarcus wed Geraldine. Calmarcus was welcomed as a hero sure to transform the house when he inherited the crown. The romance of his story endeared Geraldine to the people. New songs were written for strings, and a new epic tale joined Abascar's legends, at least for a while. While Geraldine was hard, reclusive, and hollowed out with grief, the people seemed to share Calmarcus's zeal to bring her a new start. Some housefolk saw in her a reflection of the losses they had suffered during the wars with the Kent Regis savages. In devoting themselves to her delight, they could restore their own scarred spirits. But House Abascar's love for the Queen would not last. The people had seen what they hoped to see, not the vengeful spirit sulking through the days and tiptoeing suspiciously through the palace corridors by night. Ware-sellers were known for their sharp-edged tongues, and Geraldine's words left scars. Traveling merchants of the sort that had raised her bound themselves to no house. Their lives beyond the walls hardened them, changed them, and they fought bitterly for every scrap of profit, rarely earning respect. For merchants, the art of deceptive eloquence was a matter of survival, and they could, for a fee, establish complicated contracts and cultivate trade between houses. Geraldine, it was clear, had learned how to bargain, how to make a robbery seem reasonable. Inside the house, a crown in her curls, she had seized the power her prince offered, and with a poetry of persuasion, taken more besides. When Calmarcus took the throne, Geraldine ensured that he dismissed all his father's advisers who had looked at her with ill favor. She insisted that her husband needed no counsel but her own. He came to agree, and some guessed she had bewitched him with potions from a garden she cultivated in the castle's private courtyard. Growing roots like a weed, she stole the resources that once fed everything around her. And yet, she remained ravenous. On the night of Geraldine's return from such a short visit to House Belamica, it struck Ark Robin as unlikely that she had rushed home merely to monitor the king's nurses. The queen did not seem worried about Calmarcus at all. She was as spirited as ever, dazzling them speechless. Behind her, the murmuring flickers of what had been a grand blaze retreated into the blackened wood to glower and spit, irritable and weakening. Like the king, Ark Robin thought. How may we ease our lord's suffering? There was a note of trepidation in Captain Tarbrona's tone, assuring Ark Robin he was not the only one suspecting trouble. You may ease his suffering by trusting his queen to convey his wishes. Geraldine stepped to the oak table, a section from the trunk of a tree 2,000 years strong before it had been toppled by lightning. The road has made me weary. Haste, worry, beastmen, and I am distraught by all I have seen, so I will not keep you long. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, and she exhorted them to swear secrecy. I assure you, she whispered, these words are for those who can see past the burden of a heavy task to the harvest it will yield. We have never flinched at the king's ambition, Tarbrona assured her. If it's a harvest he wants, put our shoulders to the plow. She surprised him with a slow, secretive smile. The events that followed would soon blur in the currents of time and rumor, but that smile and what Geraldine had done to set those events in motion remained indelible in Ark Robin's mind. Abascar, she began, is not as it should be. That's what I learned in my visit to Belamica. Calmarcus's illness came in the nick of time, for I was desperate to be free of their condescension. She lamented that the Belamicans held Abascar in contempt, that they questioned why such a small and pitiable house should command control of so much harvest land and such deep, rewarding mines. She gestured to a map spread across the table and explained how Belamica meant to grow and encompass islands in the Western Sea, and how they also meant to go north, troubling the dangers there, and south toward House Genta. Of course, Belamicans would never speak of plans to advance eastward, but who would dare deny that this could become a tangible threat? Eastward expansion would give Belamica control of many trade routes and encroach on Abascar's borders. Ark Robin felt a surge of ardor at the idea that war might be brewing. Would the day come at last for Abascar's warriors to ride again in force? Would his men test their training against something other than beastmen? Would the promise of Captain Tarbrona's talents as a strategist finally be fulfilled. Tarbrona objected. Belhamica bears us no malice. They owe us gratitude still for all we have done, for the way Calmarcus cleansed the wildlands of the raiders. Captain, how do you know they are not training a host of soldiers on those islands? Why are Belhamica's forges burning while a few inexperienced soldiers decorate their walls? I tell you, the day is coming when we will no longer know our neighbors to the west or what they are plotting. But there is more I must report. She placed her hand on the map of the vast Cragavar forest between Abascar and the western shores. Another threat, and this one is not about swords or spears. It's about seduction and treachery. As you know, we've had soldiers go missing from signal towers in the forest, and gatherers have been deserting their posts, never to return. I heard familiar names in Belhamica's streets. I saw strangely familiar faces. Some of them laughed when my back was turned. Abascar deserters are running into Belhamica's gloating embrace, drawn by rumors of a glorious life at the edge of the sea. You know this? Tarbrona's eyes narrowed. I was the daughter of ware-sellers, Geraldine hissed. I recognized their tone: disdain, disregard, derision. Queen Tessera's gluttonous tribe believes itself vastly superior. And how could I argue with all that I saw? We are humiliated, Captain. Instead of feeling safe, our housefolk have come to feel cheated and deprived. If Abascar's people begin to dream of House Belhamica, they will come to resent us. If Belhamica flourishes, surely their shameless exhibitions for invisible moon spirits must be more than a charade. That's what our people will decide. Abascar has not been free of foolish superstitions for long, and the tide could easily turn. Tell me, do you want the ceremonies, the bizarre costumes, the sacrifices, the flesh-painting rituals that come with such madness? She strode past her son to snatch scrolls from the shelves with both hands. I've read Abascar's histories. It's always been small, the stuff of jokes in Belhamica and Genta, but the proudest days of House Abascar were those when the people united to overcome a threat. What is it my husband boasts about? The days of discipline, when the people labored to follow a king's instruction in order to survive the Kent Regis threat. That is how Abascar resisted the spread of the beastman perversion. But since the Kent Regis decline, Abascar's people have become lazy. Nothing threatens them, so their unity and focus is weakening. They're tempted to wander. The queen tossed the scrolls onto the floor. They take the safety of these walls for granted, but new threats are rising, and it's time for Abascar to unite and grow strong again. We must give our people a dream. We'll make all things in Abascar new. The young prince, distracted from his play, looked up at the shelves thoughtfully while the wind teased the ribbons that bound the scrolls. Any plan to revolutionize a house would require difficult sacrifices. Geraldine emphasized this point. But to neglect Abascar's weakness, that would cost much more. She came and stood between them, hands alighting like gentle birds on their shoulders. The housefolk, she explained, would need leaders who inspired them, a palace radiating glory and motivation to stoke Abascar's fire. Tarbrona began to suggest that the rumors of deserters were unfounded and that beastmen were still known to drag victims away, but Geraldine's stare snapped his mouth shut. Face reddening, she walked back around the table. I want to hear about Belhamicans deserting that bloated Queen Tessera to seek the splendor of House Abascar. I want House Genta's philosophers to speak of Abascar's future in reverent whispers and bring us gifts to win favor. If the four houses all split from one great source, as our history tells us, Abascar has every right to claim itself equal to the rest. We could be the jewel of the expanse. The wars against the Kent Regis are over. Belamica has yet to advance, and Genta is preoccupied with its quiet meditation. House Abascar will seize this chance to flourish. We'll transform what we have to become the envy of the land. How will this transformation be accomplished? Asked Ark Robin, for Tarbrona seemed dumbfounded by the Queen's words. We are a smaller house than Belamica. To increase the way they have, we would need to... It's not a matter of population, she sighed. It's a matter of distinction, of glory. When people speak of a house, what do they speak of first? The palace. That is where we start. The people will refashion the palace until it is the envy of the land. The housefolk will renovate the palace. Tarbrona seemed profoundly suspicious. They will make this place a wonder, said the Queen with a smile that told them much was already decided. You want to know how we achieve such dedication? Motivation. And then she announced the unthinkable. The King has asked me to oversee a period of celebration and change in which the housefolk will unite for the transformation of the house. We will call the first chapter of this grand story The Wintering of Abascar. During this period of wintering, she explained, the people would redirect all their work, devote all their talents to tasks set for them by the palace designers. They would build a better palace, beautify it. But why the wintering of Abascar? Her secret courtyard garden had inspired her. It was speaking to her every day, revealing a plan. As a sign of commitment and unity, all people of Abascar dwelling between the palace and the walls would wear common garments, a wardrobe of black, brown, gray, and white, the colors of the expanse in winter. Abascar's people will give up their colors, their craft, their weaving, their bounty, the treasures that sit unseen within their homes, all to enhance the corridors of the palace. And what of the soldiers? Abascar's officers would police the streets, visit homes, inventory belongings, and monitor the efforts. They would note those who served without complaint and promise rewards to those who dedicated themselves openly to the Queen's plan. Tarbrona and Ark Robin were to lead the counting of Abascar's riches, from garments to livestock, from structures to combs and pillows. Then the King and Queen would invite the people to offer their best belongings as tribute. Anyone who gave willingly would win recognition, receive badges of various colors to signify the strength of their devotion, and collect an appropriate measure of precious stones from Abascar's abundant mines. These they could trade for increased privileges during the second season of Abascar's transformation. Abascar's armies would carry this collection of the people's finest to the Underkeep in a celebratory procession. Anything judged beautiful and excellent would adorn the palace and serve to glorify the king. Other items would be stripped down to raw material and recrafted into finer inventions. In this way, the palace will belong as much to the housefolk as to their king and queen, said Geraldine. And when the palace draws attention from across the expanse, Ark Robin heard himself whisper, when it shines like the sun, what then? Envisioning the change, the assembly of color like a bonfire at Abascar's center, he was distracted from asking the questions that would plague him later, questions about what this would cost the housefolk. When this was accomplished, Geraldine continued, the king would declare the beginning of the second season, which they would call Abascar's spring. On the commencement of this spring, the housefolk would be charged to fashion a new world for themselves, with design and invention surpassing anything known. During Abascar's spring, color and splendor will return to Abascar's streets, as if spilling from the palace, Geraldine rejoiced. The freedom of colors would be restored to Abascar's housefolk according to the contributions they had made. Mantles would distinguish their rank. Such visible honor would compel devotion to the house. The captain of the guard was not easily convinced. He inquired how the people would be persuaded to give up what they had. The queen insisted that Abascar's people were proud and loyal. Those who set themselves against the proclamation of the colors would be revealed as troublesome dissenters, responsible for so much of Abascar's lapse into irrelevance. When Tarbrona tried to disguise an indignant laugh as a cough, Geraldine answered without amusement. Do you challenge your king's authority? The Queen of Abascar dropped the king's heavy, square-faced ring onto the center of the table. Or are you accusing me of stealing this ring to use while my husband is too sick to stop me? Immediately, all laughter, indeed all color, drained from Tarbrona's complexion. Consider other possibilities, Captain. Perhaps I am a good wife delivering a message for her beloved lord. So, Tarbrona sighed, King Calmarcus plans to make a royal proclamation. It is why you have been summoned. You are the witnesses, and I now speak for Calmarcus. Geraldine stood straight and tall, one hand raised, the glow from the fire filling her garment with light so that she seemed to emanate supernal power. By proclamation of the king, I declare the rising of tomorrow's sun, the first day of Abascar's wintering. That was when the shelves of scrolls had fallen, casting the histories across the floor. Calraven, quietly climbing the shelves like a ladder, certain that the missing figurine had been placed out of reach, had toppled them, and he fell in a cavalcade of journals. Geraldine ran to his side, gushing words of comfort, but the boy did not cry. He stood, kicking aside the scrolls, furious, holding up a figurine. Look, Mama, he shouted. Look, someone's tried to hide the keeper. He marched to the map table and, imitating his mother's presentation of the ring, set down the stone figurine. It was crafted like a large beast with a horse's head, wings, and a gator's tail. Someone's tried to take it away. The queen flashed her effervescent smile in apology to the soldiers. The little prince is at that age, you know, phantoms, monsters, adventures everywhere. She knelt down and put an arm around her son. Calraven, you recognize Captain Tarbrona, don't you? He's been organizing patrols for many years, from the cliffs of Barnasham to Deep Lake, all the way to the Forbidding Wall. And do you know? He has never seen the Keeper. Tarbrona was not listening. His eyes were fixed on the map of Abascar. Arkroben could see that the captain already wandered its avenues in his mind, imagining the chaos that would ensue. And here, also, is Arkroben, our house defender, who is charged with training soldiers to protect us from danger. Do you think such a large and dangerous animal could hide from him? Ark Robin met the boy's inquisitive gaze. Calraven was now fully returned from his imaginary journeys, realizing the strange company of this midnight meeting. Ark Robin sensed the prince was sifting him, judging him. "They've never seen the keeper," the boy concluded, "because they've never really looked for him." Ark Robin promised himself, and not for the first time, that he would never let any son of his develop such fantasies. That is, if Ceresa ever gave him a son. The child suddenly shrieked, distracted by a muffled voice from the corridor. He broke loose from his mother, running to the chamber's closed doors. Before the queen could rebuke him, he opened them to reveal Shar Ben Frey, the king's old friend, the stonecrafter, clad in the heavy robes of a house genta philosopher. The old man entered, as though pursuing a burglar. "I've just come from the bedside of the king, and I must—" He stopped, surveying the spectacular sight of the scroll-strewn floor, and then pointed in disbelief at the table, where the ring lay upon the map like the triumphant remaining piece after a strategy game. "I see there is a ring upon the table." Shar Ben Frey kept his face concealed in his deep hood so no one could see his expression, but his voice was weary and laced with bitterness. "I crafted that ring for the king. It represents discernment, not rash decisions and folly. Do not betray him, Geraldine. Do not rob the ring of its meaning, or you will ruin the one you wear as well." "This is a private matter between the king, myself, the captain, and the defender," the queen hissed. The mage's shoulders sank. "The hunger driving this affair will not be satiated, Geraldine. Ask any of the thieves in Abascar's dungeons. The more you feed such appetites, the greater the pit becomes, until you collapse into it yourself." The old man then departed and closed the doors behind him, taking Calraven with him. From that day on, Ark Robin's life would be divided in two, forever before and after the proclamation of the colors. It sickened him to remember that he had been convinced, and worse, moved by Queen Geraldine's promise that Abascar's people would benefit from the tide of grandeur and extravagance. Her voice had been like that of a fortune teller, spinning enchantment, conjuring possibilities. He was breathless from the enormity of the vision. And later he felt robbed, distraught to find how deeply ran her lies. The queen slipped through hidden doors and tunnels in every statement, springing traps on any who protested. What was presented as an endeavor to glorify House Abascar had been a maneuver to satiate Geraldine's immeasurable jealousy and greed. For favor and advantage, volunteers carted away family treasures. They unhinged ornamental doors. They battered hand-painted shutters off their hinges and swept them into wheelbarrows. They rolled and shouldered exquisite handmade rugs like fallen trees. They strapped colorful garments into bundles and replaced them with uniforms of stifling dullness. Ark Robin stood by while his soldiers followed instructions. The defender frowned like one of the victims, even as he acted as the queen's hand against his neighbors, his own family. His bed would suffer a winter indeed. Most of the housefolk begrudgingly cooperated, for the king and queen had offered assurance of gratitude and repayment. But not everyone. An old weaver refusing to weave for the palace collapsed dead as soldiers tore open a wall to extract the giant loom he had built inside. Another, an outspoken mosaicist, barred entrance to her workshop for the inventory. When they disciplined her by removing her works from the walls, informing her that thereafter she would craft what they prescribed, she grabbed a stone-breaking implement and cast herself forward, the sharp point of the device completing the breaking of her heart in full view of her horrified neighbors and the angry enforcers. Furious, King Calmarcus, with the queen standing beside him, banished the mosaicist's young brother to the gatherers to be raised with the other orphans. Parents forced children loose from prized horses, favorite hounds, even a sizable hog, as the best livestock was marched to the royal stables, kennels, and pens. Diggers and builders expanded the underkeep to swallow 1,000 cartloads of gilt and glitter, silks and satins. Workers labored under soldiers' supervision to construct, weave, and replace colorful things with dutifully dull and simple equivalents. The palace loomed above it all, trumpeters lining its walls and Abascar's flag flying from every window, every watchtower, and every spire. To some, the sights and sounds were festive, but others, especially those who gave up what little they had to offer, murmured that the palace resembled nothing so much as a gloating thief. Spring never came. Housefolk accustomed themselves to their plain garments, sacrificing color and invention to their king, hoping for the day when such sacrifices would earn them lasting glory. A community of cooperation became a house of contention, one family against another, in the struggle to earn honors and opportunities. Once the queen had cultivated a vast garden of garments, jewelry, and wares, her devotion to management of the house disappeared. She spent days wandering the palace corridors, dreaming up new ideas, from murals for the great halls to furniture for Calraven's chamber. At night, she rose, restless, and explored the Underkeep's corridors, talking to herself, or, some said, boasting to her murdered sisters, touching all that had been collected, selecting what she liked to carry with her. She scribbled lists to catalog her treasures, and a year later she did it again until eventually even that became uninteresting to her. When the queen's health began to fail, the inventory quietly cloaked itself in dust. The contents of the Underkeep lay abandoned, entombed, but never forgotten. When Geraldine voiced further wishes for the house and was refused by the beleaguered king, she began to withdraw from him. What transpired between them in those final days together was a tale the king would never tell. But everyone knew its penultimate chapter. The queen deserted her treasures one night, even her precious garden. She ran into the woods and disappeared, inspiring 100 stories about what sort of terrible end awaited her there. She left the king in ruins, and young Calraven motherless. Ark-Robin ran his fingers through the blue stones in Auralia's basket. As he did, he wondered at the strange sieve of memory, how it caught and preserved so few days of significance. Yesterday was already fading, but he could still remember intimate details from the day he'd married the Lady Ceyressa. Clouds patterned like cobblestones, the burning of new tattoos on the backs of his hands, the heaviness of the wedding tent curtain. He could even remember the day he first saw her, years earlier, when she mended his wounded shoulder. The death of Tarbrona, that too lived bold in his memory, for some had suspected him of playing a part in the captain's demise, even though the king saw no reason to investigate. Later that same day, Ark-Robin's sudden promotion to become the new captain of the guard. He remembered the king placing the helm upon his head, but little more. And yet, of all these vivid memories, it was Geraldine's summons he could recall most clearly. He remembered the intricate detail of the heavy ring on the king's table as the queen proclaimed the wintering. Her seductive perfume still lingered, and for all his anger at her wicked machinations, he still felt the pulse of a thrill to recall her striding around the library in a gown only her husband should have seen. "What's wrong, Captain?" The voice smashed his reverie. He jerked at the reins, brought the Vaughn up short, and shouted at as the sudden movement strained the wounded muscle in his shoulder. The basket tumbled from his grasp again, blue stones spilling into the grass. Prince Calraven, now 16 years old, fair-haired, was dressed in a royal advisor's robe. As always, he was unnervingly quiet. He stood between two moonbeam trees to the left of the trail, calmly chewing a sweet reed. You look like you're sitting on an arrowhead. I was merely noting the lateness of things, my lord. Such a foolish boy, Robin thought, still creeping about outside the walls while others prepare to sleep. I would teach my own son differently, if I had a son. Indeed, it's late, for tree climbers anyway. Calraven knelt and lifted a handful of stones. There aren't many who know about quabba bird treasure, Captain. Mother taught me how to find stones like these. Haven't seen anything like them in years. Father will be so surprised. Robin surrendered them immediately with a wave of his hand. His wife would never see these exquisite stones. It would do no good to argue with the prince. Yes, of course, you don't even need to ask. I'll deliver them for you, Captain. Perhaps they will give my father a moment's distraction from his foul mood. Robin never contradicted the prince, although each time they encountered each other, his dislike of the boy increased. I'll let you in on a secret, he replied, momentarily inspired by his anger. He could strike back at Geraldine even in her absence. He could punish her son. I took these stones from a strange girl who lives free in the forest. A strange girl who lives free. The gatherers call her Auralia. She claims she isn't from Abascar. She refuses to accept the protection of the house. It will take some doing to catch her and bring her in for proper training. Where can I find her? Robin smiled. Oh, you won't find her, not unless she allows it. There was something sweet about this. The bait was set, and Calraven, mirroring his mother's arrogance and his father's curiosity, would take it. What would the king think of this? Watching his own errors played out before him. Do not trouble yourself with a wild one like her, Calraven, he continued, knowing the warning would only stoke the fires of intrigue. Free folk in the woods can lead you on quite a chase. You'll alert your patrols, of course, Calraven smirked. If she's smart enough to find a secret quabba nest, oh, what danger we're in. After my reprimand, she'll likely move to trouble some other house. A shame, really. She'll be quite a beauty someday. Robin's grip tightened around the reins. This talk was risky, rash, and driven by a grudge Calraven had not inspired. The consequences of such meddling might well outweigh the shallow satisfaction it could bring. Would the boy follow in his father's footsteps and fall under the enchantment of a meddlesome wood sprite? May the king be hearkened by the gems I've brought him. I'm sure they'll be kept safe, where no one else can see them. He risked an ultimatum by refusing an appropriate salute, then spurred his Vaughn on, cursing his impulsive temper. He glanced back over his shoulder once more, hoping to see the prince brushing off the exchange and moving on. But Calraven stood still, lost in thought, staring into the woods, blue light in his hands, as the starlings drew darkness over Abascar.